In the quiet neighborhoods of Milwaukee, something horrifying was unfolding. This is a story of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Caution: this video discusses real criminal cases and contains descriptions of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His parents were Joyce and Lionel Dahmer. His father had a college education and worked as a chemist. His mother was a machinist instructor. Even before Jeffrey was born, his mother struggled with depression. After he was born, she was very anxious, so anxious that she didn't want others to hold him. As a child, Jeffrey was energetic and happy. That changed when he was about 4 years old. He had surgery for a double hernia, and after the operation, his personality shifted. He became withdrawn and started to prefer playing alone. The family moved several times. When Jeffrey's little brother David was born on December 18, 1966, Jeffrey felt jealous. His brother got a lot of attention, and that made Jeffrey upset. The family settled in Bath, Ohio, a small town surrounded by woods. Jeffrey started at Revere High School. He wasn't close to other students. He ate lunch alone and spent break times reading fantasy novels. He was often bullied. At home, Jeffrey watched his father collect dead animals from under the house. He liked the sounds and the process. Soon Jeffrey began collecting roadkill himself. He would bring animals home and take them apart to look inside. This interest in dead animals is an important detail in understanding his later behavior. When he reached puberty, Jeffrey recognized that he was gay. That realization affected him deeply. He struggled with his feelings and began drinking, sometimes even at school. He hid alcohol in his locker. In 1978, Jeffrey graduated from high school. After his parents' divorce, his mother got custody of David and moved out. That left Jeffrey living alone in the family house. On June 18, 1978, while driving, Jeffrey picked up a hitchhiker. Sometime that night he murdered the young man. He later tried to conceal the crime at the house. This was the first known killing linked to Dahmer, and it marked the beginning of a pattern of violent crimes that would later come to light. After the first killing, Jeffrey tried to hide what he'd done. He attempted to dispose of the remains using corrosive chemicals and other methods, and scattered what was left in the woods. About 6 weeks later, Jeffrey's father and his fiancée stopped by the house. They didn't know Jeffrey was living there alone. His father was surprised to find him. Lionel wanted Jeffrey to make something of himself. He paid for Jeffrey to attend Ohio State University. Jeffrey enrolled, but he lasted only 3 months. Lionel then suggested the army as a last resort. Jeffrey enlisted and trained as a medical specialist in San Antonio, Texas. By July 1979, he was stationed in West Germany as a combat medic. While in the army, other soldiers later accused Jeffrey of sexual assault. In March 1981, the army found him unsuitable for service. He was discharged for drinking. He was sent to South Carolina for debriefing and given a plane ticket to anywhere in the US. He used it to go to Miami Beach, Florida. In Miami, he worked at a restaurant and rented a nearby hotel room. For a while things were okay, but his drinking and behavior caused problems. He lost his room and ran out of money. With nowhere else to go, he called his father and asked to come home. Back in Ohio, Jeffrey lived with his father and stepmother. They gave him chores and tried to get him working. He was arrested for disorderly conduct and fined. Lionel tried to help him with his drinking, but it didn't stick. Jeffrey then moved to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. For a time he turned to religion and seemed to change. He got a job at a blood plasma center, but he was later laid off. Over the next few years he drifted, and by the mid-1980s he began frequenting gay bathhouses. He used drugs to incapacitate some men and sexually assaulted several victims. Owners eventually banned him. After that, Jeffrey started renting rooms and meeting men on his own. On November 20, 1987, he invited a man back to his room. He drugged and assaulted the man, then later murdered him. This was another step in a pattern of escalating violent crime. The morning after, Jeffrey woke up to find the man he'd brought home dead beside him. He claimed he didn't remember what had happened. Trying to hide the evidence, he transported the body to his grandmother's basement, where he was living at the time. A week later, overwhelmed by the smell, he decided to dispose of the remains. Jeffrey attempted to keep parts of the body as mementos, but failed in his early experiments. Despite this, his obsession only grew stronger. He began going out to bars again, looking for new victims. Over the next few months, he repeated the same pattern, inviting men back, drugging them, and killing them. One of his victims was a teenage boy. Dahmer lured him with the promise of payment for photographs. Afterward, he killed him and hid the evidence in his grandmother's house. Dahmer later tried different ways to preserve body parts, experimenting with chemicals, still trying to find a method that would work. By early 1988, Dahmer had taken several more victims. On one occasion, his grandmother returned home unexpectedly, interrupting him before another planned killing. The man he had drugged was taken to a hospital and survived. Later that year, Dahmer's grandmother finally asked him to move out. She was disturbed by the smell in the house and the number of young men visiting. In September 1988, Dahmer rented his own apartment. Just one day after moving in, he was arrested for assaulting a 13-year-old boy. He was charged with sexual assault and enticement of a minor. In January 1989, he was convicted, but his sentence was delayed until May of that year. While awaiting sentencing, Dahmer returned to live with his grandmother once again. Even then, his behavior didn't stop. In March 1989, he met another man at a bar, invited him home, and murdered him. The next day, he dismembered the victim and disposed of the remains. By this point, Dahmer's pattern of violence was firmly established, one that would soon spiral even further out of control. As Dahmer's crimes continued, his behavior became more disturbing. He began keeping trophies from his victims, preserving parts of their remains as a way to remember and relive the crimes. After moving out of his grandmother's house, Dahmer got a job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory in Milwaukee. In 1989, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail for sexual assault, though he was allowed work release so he could keep his job. He served about 10 months before being released early for good behavior, and he was required to register as a sex offender. After his release, Dahmer rented an apartment at 924 North 25th Street. Within weeks, he killed again. He began taking photographs of his victims and experimenting with ways to dissolve or preserve their remains. The neighbors soon complained about strange smells coming from his apartment, but Dahmer explained them away, claiming his freezer had broken. Over the following months, his crimes escalated further. He murdered multiple men, often photographing them and attempting to keep body parts as mementos. At times, he even consumed portions of his victims, believing it made him feel closer to them. By early 1991, Dahmer had killed at least 10 people. He began experimenting with chemical methods in an attempt to exert control over his victims, efforts that became increasingly cruel and delusional. His final crimes in 1991 showed how detached from reality he had become. One night, after bringing another victim home, his plan went wrong. The young man escaped Dahmer's apartment and ran into the street, where he was helped by 3 women who called the police. When officers arrived, Dahmer tried to convince them the young man was his partner and that it was a misunderstanding. What happened next would determine whether Dahmer's killing spree finally came to an end. After the police encounter in which Dahmer convinced officers that his victim was his partner, the young man was tragically returned to Dahmer's apartment. He was killed shortly afterward. Over the next few weeks, Dahmer continued his spree. He lured more victims back to his apartment in Milwaukee, promising money for photographs or companionship. Each time, the pattern repeated: drugging, killing, and dismembering. He began storing remains in his refrigerator and freezer, keeping trophies and photographs as reminders of his crimes. By July 1991, Dahmer's behavior had reached its most extreme point. He lost his job that month, but continued killing. Just days later, one of his intended victims managed to escape. The man, still wearing a handcuff, flagged down 2 police officers in the street and told them what had happened. The officers went with him to Dahmer's apartment. Inside, they noticed Polaroid photographs showing scenes of violence. Realizing what they had discovered, they arrested Dahmer on the spot. A search of the apartment revealed a horrifying collection of evidence: human remains in the refrigerator and freezer, preserved skulls, and dozens of photographs documenting his crimes. Dahmer told police, "I should be dead for what I did." His trial began in January 1992. Dahmer's father and stepmother attended regularly. Dahmer pleaded guilty but claimed insanity. The prosecution argued that he was fully aware of his actions. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty and sane on all counts. On February 15, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison. While incarcerated at Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, he appeared to accept his punishment. He studied religion, was baptized, and read the Bible regularly. But in November 1994, Dahmer was attacked and killed by another inmate named Christopher Scarver. The life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer remain one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history, a story of cruelty, obsession, and the darkness that can exist within the human mind.